This is the Other 22 Hours podcast.
Hey, and welcome to this week's episode of the Other 22 Hours podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Shafer-Haiss.
And I'm your other host, Michaela Anne, and we are nearing the end of our second year, 85th episode, which feels crazy because there's so many people that we are excited to talk about and planning to keep this going. So thank you for being here and listening.
In the line of keeping this thing going, it takes a lot of resources to make even a tiny show like ours. And so with that, we have 3 asks, 2 different types of subscribe, and 1 share. So the first subscribe is just to subscribe or follow on your listening platform of choice. I used to hate it when people on YouTube would say that. It became a joke, but it really does help. It is a number that just lets people that are scrolling by know that like, hey, maybe this is worth 45 minutes of your time. Whether you're on Spotify or Apple or watching us on YouTube, please just take a second to hit subscribe. It goes a long way for us. Our next favorite way is share. And chances are you heard about our show via word of mouth. So if you have a favorite episode, be it this one or one of the 84 others, just take a second to share that episode in the same way you heard about it. And lastly, if you want to directly support the production of this show, we have a Patreon and we do a lot of the normal Patreon stuff. Plus, it's growing and evolving as we all are. And so if you're interested in that, there's a link below in the show notes.
And one of the things we really pride ourselves on with this podcast is that we aren't music journalists. So we are musicians ourselves. So we think of these more as conversations rather than interviews that we think can get to a more vulnerable, comfortable place. Like we are just sitting around our dinner table, sharing some of the honest realities of what it is to build a lifelong career around your art.
Which is a crazy and difficult thing to do. And that's because most of the things in this industry are outside of our control. So to combat that, we kind of like to focus the show on what is within our control. And that ends up being our mindsets and headspace and our relationship to our creativity. And we've boiled that down to the kind of mission statement underlying question. What do you do to create sustainability in your life so that you can sustain your creativity? And today we have our first repeat guest, asterisk next to that, in our friend Caroline Spence.
Caroline Spence is a critically acclaimed singer and songwriter by all the major outlets. She has toured with people like Mary Chapin Carpenter, John Moreland, Tyler Childers, American Aquarium. She's written and or recorded with people like Sarah Jarosz, McKenna, Emmylou Harris, Matt Berninger from The National. Her resume and accomplishments are quite impressive. She's also a very close friend of ours, full disclosure, and she was previously on a group format episode with us. But today we had her on to talk about her individual journey. The conversation kind of starts out with me already in some ways introducing it. So we're just going to jump right in. Without further ado, here is our conversation with Caroline Spence. Hi, Caroline. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling fine.
Yeah.
All things aside.
Yeah. You are, I think, technically our first repeat guest on this show. Welcome.
Long-time listener, second-time caller. Love it.
For our listeners, Caroline was on our episode that we called The Group Text, which was myself as a guest with Caroline Spence, Kelsey Walden, and Aaron Ray, because we have a text thread that's been going on for, oh my God, 6 years?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, 5 or 6 years.
So many gigs of data.
So many gigs of data. So many voice messages, like 10-minute voice messages back and forth.
You guys basically have like a 4-person private podcast happening.
But that episode was about, which I recommend everyone go listen to if you haven't, it was about how we support each other in community as friends who are all doing similar things in the same industry. But we're having Caroline on today to talk about her individual journey as an artist and navigating the business of music and how that's impacted her creativity and what she's done to really work to stay connected to herself and her creativity and her true love of songwriting. So we will just share the elephant in the room of this week is election week. So we just got the news of the election and it's on everybody's mind, obviously. So I feel like we can mention that as just our framework and then dig into your singular life, Caroline.
Great. That's why I answered when you asked me how I was. That's why I was so weird. I'm not usually that hard to reach.
There's a weird dichotomy happening because what's 2 days post-election, really 24 hours post, like we got the results. And this show will be airing the day before Thanksgiving. So the state that we're in now versus the state that this will be airing in is kind of like a weird mental time machine, which Michaela had
Feels
to
like
do
deja vu.
in 2016. Like literally the morning after the election, she had a conversation with Ari Shapiro on All Things Considered about gratitude and music all that. And she's like,
And Ari Shapiro was up all night covering the election, and I was like in tears, and he was like, I know, but this is airing on Thanksgiving. So we are trying to uplift people. Like, that's not what we're doing right here.
Yeah, sorry if you're listening. No uplifting allowed.
Don't try to uplift people, Caroline.
Don't worry, I won't. But I hope to have better access to my gratitude by the time this airs. That will be a goal.
So one of the reasons we wanted to have you on your own and that you and I have talked about is because you're starting to release music on your own again, meaning independently. And we wanted to talk to you about your journey of navigating the last several years of getting a record deal, what that felt like when we all think that's like the quintessential goal and what the reality of that was. So maybe let's start with where you're at right now with how you feel about the practices you've created recently to be in touch with your creativity.
Where I'm at right now with my creativity feels more secondary to my like identity than it was when all of that was happening. I think for a really long time it was the main way I defined and valued myself. And now I'm it's something that adds deeply to my life, but it's not the only place where I exist. I think I used to just feel like when I was making things, that was my purest self. And as my life has expanded and my relationships have expanded, I find myself all over my life, which is really wonderful. But it has changed my relationship to what it means to be creative, what my music does for me. I obviously value it and it adds so much to my life, but it's not everything to me anymore, which feels like a betrayal in a way to this career I've built. And it doesn't mean I don't want all these things and want to have a career. It just means that I have a deeper understanding of what it is when applied to a more healthy version of me, I guess.
I can definitely relate to that kind of feeling of like betrayal or like unease when your interests and attention and priorities start to expand and diversify. At least for me, it's like I'm pretty purposeful to use like the term my relationship with my creativity, because that does separate it from myself. And I really do feel like it is a relationship. When I was a kid, like my best friends, and I like hung out with them and nobody else mattered. And it was like two people or one person sometimes. And we spent all the time together and nothing else mattered really. Then as I get older, I have like way more friendships, way more rich relationships, and I feel more in line with myself now than I was then. Not saying that was bad, but it's just a growth and an evolution like that. And I feel the same way with my creativity, where I used to hold it so precious and that's all that mattered. And that was like the only friendship I needed. And now there's more things grabbing for my time.
I think it's so much easier to do that when you're younger for external things. Like I totally remember that feeling, this is my best friend and whatever. Yeah, you're like trying to define yourself through the examples of others. And I think if you don't have the opportunity to do the opposite of that, it can be dangerous when you go into this line of work, because then it's all external and you lose the self a little bit.
What you said was when you were in the act of creating, that's when you felt like your purest self showed up, that's where you met your purest self. But now as your life has expanded and grown, you meet yourself in all these other places as well. And I think that's a really beautiful way to look at it. But then it also makes me think about as we get older and then try and build careers on this creativity, on this experience, that is where we feel we are our purest self. But it doesn't stay there, because then those things that we create, we offer to the world. And then that response and what happens next inevitably influences how we feel about ourselves, even when we're in that moment of creativity. Can you talk about that a little bit, of like how your experience of being someone who grew up loving to write and then coming into this adult world, and grappling with what it feels like, the reception, and when that pure art turns into a product and you turn into a product.
Yeah.
What that has felt like for you and how you've thought about it over the years?
Yeah, I think I held on to that purity, that idea, a really long time in the context of the music business. I think because my relationship to songwriting really is this sort of spiritual, self-connecting thing for me, and has been since I was, 14 years old. It was like my safe place to have my feelings. I really held it in this pure high regard. I mean, I still hold it there, but it wasn't affected by the industry until a few years ago, when I'd finished a record and had received a lot of positive feedback from the label. Everyone was saying, like, this is your best work, whatever, yada, yada. And I felt great about it too. I was like, I really feel like this is the best thing I could have done. And then to have a few months go by, and there was a moment where things changed up at the label. And basically, I was like on the hook, potentially about to be dropped, this record held by them for forever. And the reason for it had nothing to do with the quality of the work. It was absolutely social media and numbers and some guy in the marketing department's opinion. There's this quote I like from The Artist's Way that says, the artist has to be humble because we're essentially a channel. And so I felt like I'd done my job. I'd humbled myself. I'd looked at the world. I'd made these songs and they were good. And everyone was telling me they were good, but it wasn't good enough. And so my whole career, I had just built on this idea of enhancing that relationship with myself, that like pure spiritual relationship, in order for the songs to get better and for me to grow as an artist and to get better at what my craft was. And I felt like I'd done it. I'd done it objectively, and it just wasn't good enough. And that is what sort of broke my little spirit and made me realize I'd been defining myself too much, or like my idea of my creativity and my career were too tied up, because the career is like affected by the business, you know. But yeah, so that was sort of the beginning of the end of my respect for the music industry.
Yeah.
I think the beginning of me building respect for myself outside of what it is that I did creatively and in the industry. It was totally crushing to be like, I did the work that matters to me, and it felt completely irrelevant to the job.
Well, and I think like what a lot of conversations and what we've seen over the last several years with social media is some of us rather naively probably think we're the creators. And then you guys, the label, you guys pay for it. And you think that is the most important thing, that you have the money, because that means also you think you should own it forever. And the creation has actually no weight. So we think, okay, we did our job. But now more than ever, they're like, oh, what matters even more than the art is all this other stuff that I think a lot of artists are like, wait, aren't you supposed to do that? Aren't you supposed to do the marketing and the packaging and the selling? And more the business is, well, no, you have to do everything. And that gets wrapped up in our ability to market, and TikTok and be a social influencer gets confused and intertwined with our ability to create quality art. And I feel like that's like a constant thing that comes up for artists today. It's impossible to quantify like how good my song is. So we're just looking at these things like tech numbers. It's like the soul work of being like, that doesn't inform who I am.
Yeah, literally the only thing that is going to make me able to sleep at night is if I know that the work I've made is good, in the way that like we define it as artists. You know, you guys talk about being about like what we can control versus what we can't control. And I do think that experience that I just talked about, I could control the record I made. I made a great record, and I know that, but I can't control the way the marketing guy feels about me as a product. And what do I really value around my art? Trying to build this wall of like, okay, well, those are the opinions that I'm really going to take to heart. It's not that I don't want to be a successful product, but I'm not going to go around feeling like a shitty product when I wrote a great song. You know what I mean? Like, just trying to understand which voices are worthwhile what context is a big lesson. Like, I feel like I overcorrected a little bit and was like, didn't want to hear from anybody for a while, but I had to do that to kind of build myself back up. But yeah, I am much more happy with the stuff I can control, which is the making of the art. Everything else really has to be secondary for me to be able to even get to the place where I want to write at all.
The thing that rings in my head through all of this and through conversations I've had with both of you guys, not in front of microphones, and other people I know that either are currently in label deals or have had label deals in the past, I see that these labels are trying to exist without having to take the responsibilities that are required of their job. And that's the risk of marketing and putting the product out there. You know what I mean? It's like the factories that Nike and Apple hire to make their products are not responsible for selling the products. They're responsible for making the product as well as they possibly can. There's a whole other team that sells it. And it's this like dereliction of duty on the label's part to do what they want. I see my hope and want for this podcast is that it translates past, yes, we're talking to musicians about creativity because that's what we know and that's like what we can relate on. But we hear from like radiologists and obstetricians and like all of these people that listen to this show and can relate in their industry. And that's because creativity is inherently part of everything that we do as a job. There has to be some kind of creativity and approach to what you do to like push the boundaries and do something new. And it's just very unfortunate that we are in this industry, that the two sides of this industry being us as the artists, which is like almost purely creative, then are held by this dam that is being so not creative. They're on their heels and they're being reactionary rather than being proactionary. It's very disappointing, which has then brought me to, like you mentioned and brought up, we try to talk about what we can control in this. And part of streaming is like we can control our music and releasing our music. Does it mean us as artists taking on the risk of budgets and all of that? Yeah, absolutely. But it also gives us the freedom of being able to hire people that can present our art and music in a way that we think serves our music and
is creative
and is fresh.
That was one of the hardest things for me when I was signed to a label, was the parameters in which I was given to promote and whatever the music was very much felt like a cog in the wheel. There was no room for adjustment, no room for creativity. I had to use certain people and that felt really limiting. And first album, I was like, okay, I'll play by the rules. Second album, I was like, this is ridiculous. Why are we spending money on this when I don't care about that? Why aren't we spending money on this when I need that? Also, it felt like everyone on that label were given like the same 5 things and you just had to do it no matter at what level you were. And I was like, on a business side, I was like, this isn't helpful. And then also I would have ideas that were particular to my songs, my music, my career, my fan base. And I would just hear no because no one else was doing it. But the whole point is that, yeah, no one else is doing it because it's applicable to my career. So I just kept hearing no about so many things that like, you know, I put out 2 albums and made my 3rd independently before it was released by a label. So I'd done this. And the reason why I was signed is because I got my career on my own to a certain level. It felt like they were in the way. And even things that were done while I was in that relationship, collaboration specifically, every single one, I was told no. And so it was just like this constant fight for like not only creative ideas that really were going to feel good to me as an artist, but also like on a business side were like objectively good ideas. But like you said, on the industry side, people have to work within their own parameters and you're a line item on a spreadsheet and it's not in the green. I guess that person can only do so much, but it just was so spirit crushing and like kind of a mind fuck, to be honest, of like, why are you saying no to this? This makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's in all of this frustration that I hear talking with friends that have label deals and all that about being held back. I also hear like this undertone of we want labels to do well. We want labels to be creative. We want labels to like put our music out in a creative way that is new. There's also like this frustration of them holding it back, but then like this disappointment of them like not being cooler, like not being creative, not being fresh.
Yeah.
Like, we all want that.
Yes, I expected when you have that amount of money to invest in an artist that you're like gonna maybe try harder.
Yeah, exactly. That whole thing, like, nobody does it this way. Like, good, let's do it that way. To me, that's like a green light when nobody does it that way. Everybody like blames Spotify, but like if you look at what Spotify did, like nobody was doing that. It's like, okay, you have like Napster and LimeWire and all these places where there's music for free. It's like, okay, what if we just took all of that? Everything was high quality. You're not going to go like try to listen to a Caroline Spence song and get like some like Fish jam from like Ohio in 1994 that was recorded on somebody's mini disc player or whatever. Like the songs are going to be what they say they are. It's going to be high quality. Put an asterisk next there for all our audiophile friends, but a standardized quality at least. And then we just charge people a subscription for it. At the time, I'm sure people are like, I'm not going to pay for stuff I can get for free. But like people are paying for music now more than they were. It doesn't come to us. But all I'm saying is that like Spotify, I don't even need to single out Spotify, but it has been shown across industries and across history that like fresh ideas and people that take risks are rewarded. The industry needs to do that. It's expected of us as artists to make like new art, fresh art, something that's intriguing, something that's like all of that, which is awesome. Like let's find new stuff and new ways for you to share your voice. We need to expect that of labels too.
This conversation is also making me be like, I feel like next year we really should have some people who work at record labels come on this, because it's really challenging. Because I think in my conversations with people who work at labels, they're also at a loss. And a lot of times the people that are responsible, that play a role in our lives as creatives of feeling like they're dream killers, like sometimes it's because their hands are tied. And it's like, it's up what chain of command. And I always reference, and Caroline, you and I personally have talked about this, like where I came from a different perspective because the beginning of my career was spent 2-3 years working at a record label, and a record label that's like really respected, None Such Records. And my experience was like, I knew this office of people who were so wonderful and working so hard, in my opinion, all day trying to sell records and market artists' careers. I guarantee you, I know because it was public, that there are bands like Wilco or different artists who felt incredibly stifled and creatively blocked and not supported by deals with that label too. And I always try and remember that, like there's these bureaucratic things that really fuck up our art and our creativity.
Yes. It's the infrastructure really versus the people that are in the office. Sometimes it's the people in the office.
Totally. Sometimes it is the people.
Sometimes it really is. But I would say, yeah, there's only so much a project manager can do for you, even if they like the idea, if there's like a million steps they have to take to get the green light. There's only so much they can do. So it's not their fault, but it's, I just found the infrastructure for the type of career that I have and trying to have was very limiting. And how it affected me personally was like, when you hear that many no's to your creative ideas, and then it wasn't safe for me to make things, basically. If I had an idea and I went in the studio and I made it, they owned it, first of all. And if they didn't like it, it would just never exist in the world.
Right.
And I couldn't take it with me if I left. What that infrastructure did to me is that I stopped letting myself have ideas and letting myself make things because it wasn't safe. Someone was going to say no, then they were going to own this thing that mattered to me that they didn't value. And that was really the turning point when I was like, oh, I'm not being creative because my creativity isn't really safe because it's owned by somebody else. That part of my career really sucked. I did not like that.
That's what I think is valuable. And I want to talk about that recovery, like what you've actually done to help yourself recover, because I think that's the most valuable part of this conversation is some artists might be like, cool, I get the infrastructure of record labels. I'm willing to play the game because I just want this other thing so much. And other artists might have a response like yours of like, the thing that I want is creative freedom. I'm not getting that in this experience and I'm not feeling supported. So again, like always trying to ground ourselves in like, what is the ethos of this podcast and why we're doing that? It's like constantly trying to help each other understand like what we think are the markers of success don't fit all of us and actually don't feel like success for all of us. And untying that for yourself of like, especially living in Nashville in this community, I think especially about our community, for anybody who doesn't realize listening that you and I are very close friends and talk like on a daily basis. And around that time when you signed your label deal, there was a kind of group of us, like we were all getting our first label deals. And it felt like all these kind of like check marks of like, yeah, see, we're all getting like, we're getting support, we're gaining recognition and success, and we're doing it together. And like, it's so cool. And we all individually have had our own experiences of what that has been like the last several years. What I feel passionate about is like sharing like, man, what we see on the outside and have been brought up to believe is the way. For me personally, it was more disappointing, I think, because I was like, oh, this doesn't feel as good as I thought it was supposed to.
Yeah.
And unwrapping my confidence and my feeling of being affirmed as an artist, regardless of who else was telling the world, yeah, she's good, by signing me to their label or booking me shows or whatever. That process of feeling good about myself, even though I've detracted myself from this structure that we all grew up thinking that's the goal, has been a process for me. And I'm curious what it's been like for you.
Yeah, really, that transition for me started in that chapter when they were threatening to drop this record. With this sort of feeling of being devalued, it affected me as a person so much more than it should have. And like, that was like almost an entire year. I felt like a failure. You know, this is an album that was good, that I'd written with one of my biggest heroes on. This was a year where I opened up for my childhood hero. This label head in particular had gotten to me so bad that my self-esteem and my identity was like so crushed. And the recovery for me was realizing like Caroline as a business and Caroline as an artist have to be two different things. And further, Caroline as an artist and Caroline as a human being, also, that's something I never bothered to separate because I've been doing this for so long. And at a point in my young life where you're like searching for identity and approval, that I just was like, I'm only good if I'm Caroline the artist. And so it was a real lesson in like personal self-esteem and then also career self-esteem of being able to stand on my own in each of those identities and knowing when to lead with which one. But I think I overcorrected for a while and was like, I'm just going to be a person. I don't need this career, blah, blah, blah. But I had to really, and all the while I'm like making things and loving stuff, but like publicly, just not touring, not releasing stuff. But now I feel like my place that I find myself in recovery is letting my career feel safe again, because I've never been this person, this version of myself in this job before with this set of values. There's so many learned bad habits and unhelpful points of view that I think we all absorb by being young people trying to make it. And I've had a few moments where I've been able to be like, okay, you are practicing what you preach. Like you're able to sort of put that down and lead with the healthier choice. But yeah, for me, it was just really focusing on the person behind the scenes and being able to like feel good about the personal and artistic wins that like nobody sees.
Focusing on wins is a hard thing for me to do. And it's a hard thing I see for a lot of friends. It's really easy to focus on what's not going right or struggles or all of that because it's like a very visceral thing. I have started, and I think I've talked about it on here before, but like I have a note on my phone like where I mark down like wins. I might just like take a screenshot of something and put it in there or like write something down. And it's just something I can look at, and I don't look at it often, more often than I forget it exists. But when I do remember it exists, I look at it, it's like, oh yeah, okay, cool. And it's a nice like little, I don't know, I want to use like the word like trampoline. Because like I'll fall, it kind of like bounces me back up a little bit. But like, yeah, having to focus on like the little small wins and the day-to-day wins of like, speaking of Lori McKenna, she called them like signposts, the little signposts along the way, like this is the right path here.
Speaking of Lori McKenna.
Well, you know, that's like my dream songwriter that I got to write
that you got to write with, yes.
I literally
sings with you.
But yeah, just being like, I have done every single thing I wanted to do. I've reached every single goal my younger self wanted. And like that chapter where everything was such a struggle with the record and these unhelpful voices, I lost track of that. I literally said by 30, I wanted a pub deal. I wanted to write with Lori and McKenna, all these things. And then a few more that were insane that I like never could have seen coming. Still, these industry voices were able to get to me, and I devalued myself. And so it's such cognitive dissonance. But I think that's what I'm really trying to hang my hat on is I did what I wanted. And most of it I did on my own. And I'm continuing to do work that I feel proud of, that I feel like, and building a reputation that I feel proud of. And ultimately, no one can take that away from me unless I let them. And I just let them. I just wasn't strong enough to fight back from that. And so I think my recovery has really been building that strength up again. And some of it has been allowing myself to be angry.
Yeah.
And allowing myself to have an ego that is helpful. Because I think I had made myself so small and didn't want to be angry. Classic lady behavior. I just kind of had to like come up and be like, yeah, no, this isn't working. I don't like this. I need something better.
There's a fine line between cocky and confident. And there's such a stigma behind cocky, which I understand. But it is possible to be confident and humble at the same time.
Yes, I think so.
You know what I mean? You can be humble and open and polite and empathetic, but also confident in what you do, you know, and confident in the quality of what you make and your approach, whatever it might be. You can be all of those and not be cocky. It's possible.
Yeah. I think that was a fear for a long time of like, if I didn't appear so agreeable or something, then I would be perceived as cocky. But I literally just got self-esteem at like the age of 30 years old. So I was like, I don't think it's going to be an issue. But yeah, it's wild kind of thing to navigate in a career because you forget as a person, I want to be sweet and agreeable and helpful and all those things. But as a businesswoman, those things don't really help you. You need to take up a little more space.
Well, and it's also so challenging to stand up for yourself, whether it's like verbally or by making the decision of like, oh, I know that this space isn't supportive for me anymore and I need to go elsewhere and not take this information and what these people are telling me as my truth.
Yeah.
And knowing that you can do all of those things, you're having to do that in the face of people telling you you're less than, that you're not good enough. And you have to like work so hard to be like, wait, they're telling me this, but let me look at all the things I've done and what I have built, and also just my inherent value, and also just my inherent belief in how we should treat each other as people. And I think about that a lot. Like, I don't think she'll mind me referencing, but Mary Gaucher is like, I mean, to most of us, she's like a spiritual sage that kind of always has the right thing to offer. Like, I was sharing with her my experience that I've shared a million times on this podcast about what was probably my most damaging industry relationship of like my big time booking agent who said all these incredible things about me and made me believe, oh, well, if he thinks these great things about me, then they must be true, that I'm compared to my heroes and all this stuff. And then I gave him that power so that when he told me the opposite of those things, I believed that. And now that I feel more recovered from that, I was sharing with Mary of I wish I had had the strength at the time to stand up for myself and say no. And Mary was like, Michaela, that's like putting you in the ring with Muhammad Ali. Like you.
Yeah, there's no way we could have done that at our career, Michaela. There's no way.
Exactly. Yeah. She's like, you're like a young 30-some woman going up against a veteran industry person who has this stack of success and power. Like, that is unreasonable expectations for yourself. So having that grace also of, okay, this is an experience I had. If I have it again, I will know how I want to behave in response. And also the value in sharing these experiences in the hopes that it helps others respond. It's a really difficult thing to do, to bolster yourself in the face of people being like, you're no longer worthy of our time or investment. Like, and be like, cool, I know I am worthy elsewhere. So goodbye.
That's the big paradigm that's so hard for all of us, no matter where we're at, to keep front and center, is like, it feels like all of these people have the power. They really don't, because if no artists signed with them and all the artists left, they would literally have no job, whether it's a label or an agent and all of that. So who really does have the power?
Yeah. I think when I first entered that relationship, I was very submissive to them because I was just like so grateful to have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And then over time, I was like, I have my own dang table and I get to choose who sits there. And I have some regrets, but no big regrets about the decision I made, sign with them and go through that experience. I also have no regrets about asking to leave. I think it's really hard to let yourself not want the thing that you're supposed to want. I just want to enjoy my life and I want to enjoy my career. And in order to do that, I have to be at the table with people who are creative and excited and wanting me to be myself. In that relationship, there was an idea of who I was and a definitely idea of who I should be. And I found myself in a lot of situations feeling like I was walking into a room who was expecting someone else. And that's just not a good feeling. And I've done the work of what my creativity is for me and how I want my songs to live in the world. Back to that quote about the artist being humble. To get to the place where I can write from my like unaffected voice and thoughts, I have to really get down in the dirt and submit and serve some sort of higher whatever. And to then come out of that, making these things, and then have to present it in this culture of like faux celebrity and like way of taking yourself so seriously and whatever, trying to join those two things of like deep, pure spiritual like solitude and creativity and the me of it all, it's like crazy making. And I'm still trying to figure out what it is, but whatever they were expecting it to be for me, I just couldn't do it because there was such an ick, like deep like spiritual ick. And so I'm still trying to figure out how to live in this world. I mean, it's like, honestly, if I knew what this job was going to be like nowadays, I don't know if my younger self would have made these choices. Like, this is so hard. My sweet therapist at the time of all this was like, this is maybe the worst career you could have chosen for your particular personality and traumas. I was like, yeah, it's really fun out here. I mean, I moved here thinking I'd be like a songwriter behind the scenes. And honestly, that still feels like more comfortable than trying to be an artist. But I've so enjoyed this journey of getting to know myself as an artist and songwriter. But yeah, it's hard out there, kids. It's hard.
One of the things we talk about sometimes on this podcast, I feel like it's actually been a while, is like using our songs as a therapeutic practice or feeling like, and maybe it's also both, but like, do we work things out through our songs or do we feel like we have to use other mediums and other therapeutic practices to work things out to then be able to write songs? And I'm curious for you what that feels like, because I also have like a little more insider information because I've heard some of your songs that you haven't yet released, and you have an incredible song that you just released, Confront It, where it feels like a lot of this stuff is being worked out in your songs. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think those things have very much gone hand in hand the last 3 years. I've been in therapy on and off during that time, from being isolated in the pandemic to having to shoot 3 music videos in a day. I was like, I can't be perceived anymore. Like, how do I adjust? Whatever. And just like so much self-work in the last couple of years. And yeah, it comes out because I really sit down by myself. It's always felt like when I sit down by myself and get quiet, that's when my real thoughts appear. And sometimes I don't figure out how I feel about something until I've put it in the format of the song. When I hear that out loud, it's like so woo-woo, but it's really like Confront It, I wrote in 30 minutes. There's been a couple where it's just like somehow I put myself in this context and I can access some part of my brain that doesn't filter out the bad stuff or the hard stuff. So many of us, including myself, we walk around trying to push down the hard stuff. And so I do feel like one of the roles I feel like I play as an artist is to give somebody my hard feelings wrapped up in a little bow so it doesn't feel like this big giant gray cloud that hangs above you, because it felt that way until I wrote this thing.
Yeah.
There have been so many songs since I've started being in therapy on and off that have felt like that for me. As I've put them out in the world, it's been shared with me that it's felt that way to others. And that has been deeply meaningful because it makes me feel less alone, because I felt super alone when I wrote that, and it made someone else feel less alone. So in taking care of myself, in offering of myself, it's been shown to me that it can help others. So that's something that self-work has given me. And it's changed how I want to show up in my career.
What you're just saying, like, really encapsulated what I was thinking when you mentioned this era of faux celebrity. There are infinite possibilities to show up as a celebrity beyond the stereotypical image of what we have as a celebrity. And to me, showing up like that, being honest and real in your songs, is this beacon, this idol, something that somebody can see to then show up as themselves. So if you remove both people, both objects on the side of the equation, in the middle is being drawn to something, being like inspired by something, as simple as like being moved by something, whether it's a celebrity on the level of Beyonce or it's a vulnerability celebrity of showing up honestly and in integrity in your songs. To me, that's doing the same exact thing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this stereotypical on the front of a box of Wheaties celebrity that we've come to know.
Well, I think it goes back to all of us continually deciding for ourselves what is our why and what feels good for us as artists, and what we're willing to adapt to or change to in exchange for what we think we'll get out of it. We hear all the time people being like, I hate TikTok, but if that's what I got to do to try and like reach people with my music, I'll do it. And there's no shame in any of that. I think we all need to know what our desires are, our true desires. Do I want to be pop star status? Okay, there's definitely things that seem like you have to do to be pop star status. If you're not willing to do that, know thyself, basically, which I think is like what we're really essentially talking about, is coming to know what our lines are, even if they're not like deep, scary lines. Just, I don't want to do that. So clearly I don't want that other thing that badly. I want this other thing, even if it's smaller.
Yes,
and
I think the hardest thing is accepting that and really not getting the other thing bother you.
Yes.
I'm like, I'm not gonna play Bonnaroo. I mean, I would, but like, I just am like, I would rather have the career where I'm playing like Eddie's Attic a bunch of nights in a row, and connecting with people and talking with people, than having to throw together a festival set every single weekend. Not that I don't love that too, because I love that, but it's
not your ideal.
It's not my ideal. And also, like, it's one of those things where, like, if that opportunity presents itself, I think I would know how to step up to it. I'm not building my career in a way where that feels like an obvious opportunity. And so I can't idolize playing Lollapalooza if I'm writing slow fucking emotional ballads only or whatever. I don't know. I feel like now the kids are loving that. So who knows? But just like being able to see yourself realistically and allow things that feel good to you to be good enough. And I mean, I think that one of the reasons I'm able to feel this way is because I do feel like my home life, I'm married, we're expecting a kid. Part of my career is writing for film and TV and other people, and I write when I'm at home. I have this rich life outside of being on stage and being perceived that does satisfy me personally and creatively. So I don't have this singular environment in which I'm able to feel creatively satisfied. So that's something we all can control, is trying to figure out what spaces we can occupy and access that part of ourselves. Because I feel just as good writing something for film and TV and like getting to see a track go from like A to Z than I do like being on stage and playing a show. They're equal. And sometimes the creation for me is really the best part. So yeah, I feel lucky that I have other spaces outside of a public career where I'm able to feel like an artist.
Earlier you said you've done everything that you've wanted to do. There was a checklist and you checked those things, you accomplished those goals. That's something I've experienced, something I've heard a lot of people around our age, around our point in the long path of this career, heard them say. And it makes me think that like, obviously achieving your goals is incredible, but like, you know, when those goals are long running, like they are for a lot of us, to do X, Y, and Z that you had as a goal as a 15-year-old, they're wonderful, but those are like sugar highs, the high fructose corn syrup sugar version of success. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It tastes really great, but like
You need more.
you're going to constantly need more and need more. Once you can recalibrate and taste the difference between like the sweetness of a Gala apple and a Honeycrisp apple, to use our kid as an example, I think there's a lot more opportunity for sweetness, to just really just hammer this analogy home. And like hearing you say that you get this fulfillment of seeing something that you're making go from like A to Z is kind of the same as like being on stage. Like it just makes me really happy to hear that. And I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, I think we forget about the personal satisfaction being a big part of the sustainability. Sometimes when we're caught up in the sugar high of it all. And something I've said to Michaela several times is, this is your life.
Yes.
This is your life. Like when we've been like caught up in, should I like drive 16 hours for this one-off that pays blah, blah, blah? Or like, you know, this person said that this is your life. This is literally your life and no one else's. And I'm really trying to practice what I preach and remember that. The fact that I've done this as part of my living for so long is unbelievable. And the fact that I'm pretty good at the thing that makes me the happiest is incredibly lucky. I spent a lot of my life not enjoying myself as like a person and not valuing her outside of this. I just really am like, my personal satisfaction, my relationships, my friendships feel so important. And I think that is going to be a huge part of my sustainability, and my ability to do this work going forward is continuing to anchor myself to that more than anything else.
Yeah. And I think we can have these core beliefs or these evolutions where we learn this and also understand we still need the reminders for ourselves, that there still might be a day where we get pulled into feeling, as we know, because the three of us are intimately involved in each other's lives and very close friends, of like some days we're all really good at standing in what we feel like we've grown into and valuing a whole full life. And other days we're like, fuck, this is hard. And I'm letting these negative things come in.
I mean, that's like why the group text episode and so many of the other people talk about the importance of community, having people around for showing you different examples. I mean, that's what this podcast does. It shows you different examples of versions of, you know, what our life is. And it's very grounding and can kind of get you off the ledge. But yeah, even though I've learned all this, I have not had to put it into serious practice within the context of an album release. So I'm about to.
Oh, yeah.
So far, so good. But I think what's going to help me navigate this is that I'm in complete control of this release. I think it's going to be a lot easier for me to live by the lessons I've learned because I'm going to own my shit.
Yeah.
Literally and figuratively. So
that empowering feeling. I feel like we need to have follow-ups. We're going to have to do a follow-up next year after you've gone through the whole album cycle. We need a follow-up with Becca.
You did call her out.
I know, because Becca Mancari was on here and was at the beginning of it and was like, I feel so strong in myself. I'm like, let's talk in a year and see how you did. Not like, I think you're going to have a hard time, but just, I'm so curious the practice we have to do. It's always all the things. I always think about parenthood is such a helpful growth mechanism in my experience. That doesn't mean I think everyone needs to be parents or should be parents or anything like that. I'm very careful of those cliches, but like I remember so much of my fear around becoming a mother of how it would keep me from getting to do the things I wanted to do. And I really valued career building and touring and like the high of that and was addicted to it and still struggle with that sometimes. But I remember like one night Georgia was like in her diaper and we were all just laying in bed and she was toddling around, a little toddler, and she like tripped and fell and landed on Aaron's face with her diaper. So she was like sitting on his face and farted. And like the three of us thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And she was like 2. So it felt like this momentous thing of like, we're in on this joke with our little 2-year-old that we're watching like develop a personality. And I remember in that moment, the like hysterical laughter of the three of us. I had like a flash of, this is like higher than any high I've ever experienced. And like, it's different.
Funny, me with a toddler butt on my face getting farted on. Didn't think it
Aaron
was
might
like
remember it a little differently.
But what an analogy for the music industry. You know, sometimes the toddler sits on your face and farts, and it's just like, it's actually the greatest thing. I am giving a gift to the world.
And sometimes the toddler is the record label. Oh my God.
And won't stop saying no. Oh my God.
I will say a toddler's
like
way
a
better at
toddler.
releasing than a record label, though.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyways, but that goes back to like the personal wins that nobody else knows about. Clearly now people know about it because I just shared it. But really valuing these things that are not on a resume, that are not postable, that are really about like just our own nourishment are always good reminders.
Yeah. I can't remember who I first heard say this, but it's like you can only write so many songs about being on the road. It becomes unrelatable if all your songs are about this job. And I've had a few of those. And then I was like, well, I don't have anything else to write about because that's all I'm doing. So live your life. It's a material.
Yeah. And I feel like I also need to raise the caveat that like you guys have both mentioned that when the label comes back and they're like, the number's this and blah, blah, blah. And they present it as like your failure. Doesn't mean they're right. It's actually their failure because their job is to get your record heard. So technically they're the one failing. And even though they're saying that you are the one failing, doesn't mean that they're right. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. Summary of this episode is the Caroline Spence quote. Your life is yours.
Your life is yours. It's literally only for you.
Your life is for you. That's what you always say. That's the exact wording.
Your life is for you. Yeah. Oh, that is nice.
It is nice.
I like how we all just kind of sat here and marinated in that for a minute.
I think about it all the time because there's been millions of phone calls where I'm spinning out and Caroline says, Michaela, your life is for you. And it helps put it in perspective of like, I got some choices here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you always have power.
It's like they want us to share more of ourselves and whatever as a means of marketing, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But that's a version of your life. And then there's your real life and not getting those two things confused. But yeah. Oh, you know what? I'm wise sometimes. I'm just going to sit in that. That's a good quote. That's a good quote.
You are.
Well, thank you so much for making time to come and sit with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being willing to share so openly about what you've been going through.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all. It's been a struggle for me to talk about this in any sort of public way, put it in a little Instagram post. So it's been nice to have the opportunity to maybe catch up a couple fans who've been wondering what the hell I've been hitting at for 4 years.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for being so sweet and welcoming.
All right, Caroline, thank you so much.
Bye. Love y'all.
Love
Bye.
you.
See
Bye.
ya.
Hey, real quick before we wrap up today's episode, it takes a lot to produce even a small show like ours, so if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider taking a minute to check out our Patreon. There's a lot happening over there, all with the intent of growing our community and offering you more resources to navigate a career based on your art more sustainably. You can learn more at the link in the show notes below. Thanks for being here with us, and we'll catch you next time on the Other 22 Hours podcast.